Maybe I will take a break. I'm an idiot. Hello, everybody. This is not Bologna for the century. This is interview with Doctor Akbar. Huh? Welcome, everybody, to this interview and chat. Well, let me change that. Sorry, I had 10 minutes to do this. Review with Doctor Akbar. It's AGPAIR, right? There we are. You have no idea. I was putting posts on Reddit and I messed it up and I submitted like, wait, I knew. Let me go back and change it. Oh! Okay, everybody. So today we're very lucky to have again our lovely Doctor Blair, Doctor Akbar, which is definitely the name she goes by on Twitch, generally speaking. She's an expert in. Oh, well. Oh Lord. She is a Doctor of Art History with a thesis on Matilda of Canossa. And today we're going to talk about her Gospels. There's definitely not Dr. Akbar in the chat, as a different person. And discussing the Gospels of Matilda, of which, especially this illumination that's on the stream right now, which is the cleansing of the feet. You said temple, but you mean feet, right? Oh, bottom half. Oh, I see. So now we're gonna look at the Peter cutting off the ear of the servant. Sure. And the Gospels of Matilda. Done. Let me open that up as well on this side. 84R. There it is. Yeah, last time you came up here, we discussed the Vita Matildis, which was what we've been describing for a while on the stream. Oh yeah, good shot. Oops, I closed one. Can you see the stream, by the way? Is everything functioning? Nice. It's only two of us right now, which is always fun. So it's a good start to the stream when it's like two people. And this is the cleansing of temple, right? Excellent. So. Okay. So why don't you just introduce to me what this old gospel is, from and by whom and why? Yeah, Lizard. And that could be a good starting point for the video afterwards as well on the YouTubes. Oh, wait.
I'm muted. How?
Okay, what about now?
How?
That's it's because I didn't put on the desktop audio. Because I am a new person on the streaming world. Can you hear it now, editor?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, why are you asking? He can hear you fine.
I cannot hear from my. If you unmute the stream yourself, maybe you can check it out what it sounds like. Yeah. Great. Okay.
Okay. Oh, that's.
Yeah.
I hate hearing myself.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? So that's why I mute my stream all the time. Thanks, Alexander, for that. That was great. That was a good shout. So let's start back from the beginning. Okay, I'm introduced already. Tell us about the gospel. Go back from the top. Back from the top of the speech.
Right. So, so there is some questioning of the dating of this manuscript. It's kind of variously been put at anywhere from late 1080s, early 1090s to where I put it in 1099, which I'll get to, all the way to the end of her life around 1115 when Matilda died. I think the best, most convincing argument actually falls in a little booklet inside the manuscript itself called the Liber Vitae. And Liber Vitae basically goes on to list the churches where it was originally housed at, San Benedetto, which is about, I think, 6 kilometers outside Mantua. Basically, that they were obligated to kind of continue praising Matilda's name, and that they had to say a prayer for her. And they asked her to do one for her advisor, her military advisor, Arduino della Palude. And this kind of secures the date because it falls right between the 2 different abbots at the monastery. So if you kind of take that to be the kind of earliest it possibly could have been, it's about 1099. There is someone, Fabrizio Crivello, I think that's what it, yeah, Fabrizio Crivello suggests that the manuscript maybe is unfinished, which is, you can kind of see that in the the illuminations themselves. They're really kind of devoid of all color and decoration, which is rather unusual for this time period and the area in which it was made. And he actually pinpoints the date to the late 1080s, early 1090s, when you would have had a lot of various military campaigns kind of running through the area. And he suggests that it was actually interrupted, that one of Henry's campaigns through Mantua, which kind of affected, it's not really clear to what extent, but kind of affected the monastery. He suggested that that's why they stopped work on the manuscript, and that's why you have the beginning of it is really kind of sumptuously colored. It's got, if you go to the front of the manuscript itself physically,
It'll be 13R, right?
It's a lot more decorated versus the manuscripts, even the one in illuminations that we're looking at now, which are just kind of line drawings. They're kind of overly simplistic in a lot of ways, having just had, you have like the base drawing, and then you have red, and then you have in some of them gold. Now, I don't think that that's actually, I disagree with that theory. I think it's, there's a different analysis of Matilda's military kind of strategies and her conquests through her life. It's a great analysis by David Hay, who I think is at Toronto, if I'm remembering correctly. And he wrote this great book in 2008 that really kind of lays out the entirety of her involvement in military campaigns through her life. Absolutely fantastic. But he does an analysis of this time period in part of this larger, and it seems that even though San Benedetto would have had, they would have been affected by the military kind of goings on in the area, they themselves weren't really the subject of any real attack, not anything that would have like so suddenly disrupted work. Then I also kind of combine that with the fact that we only have records of her patronage of this monastery starting from 1092. So it kind of seems unusual. I mean, obviously, it's possible that there are documents that are missing that may have kind of led to this. But it seems really unlikely to me anyway that if the first document for her patronage starts in 1092, that they would have been already working on a manuscript for her to then have been interrupted in the first place.
1099, yeah.
Yeah. So I think because the patronage starts in 1092 and then kind of picks up really precipitously, she kind of starts frequenting them with donations and charters pretty much every year up until the end of her life. It seems more likely that that was the beginning of the relationship. And then by 1099, you have this exchange where she gives them a bunch of land and a bunch of privileges. And in return, I think that this is the kind of return to effort, was this manuscript. We know that it was meant to sit on an altar, which suggests that it was pretty important. It had a list of names. It would be read out before every mass. All of this kind of suggests that this was supposed to, in some way, highlight Matilda's involvement with the monastery, more, say, than just, acknowledging her in a charter.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. Actually, just got in my mind. Why would the return gift, or not necessarily, was it then a gift or something they kept in the monastery and used as a reminder to pray for Matilda? Like, what was the exchange? Was it spiritual or a more physical exchange? If you know what I mean.
I do think it's both. So this is the same monastery that she eventually was buried in.
Okay.
So she in 1114, about 6 months before she died, she reconfirmed a massive donation to this monastery. And then in 1115, May of 1115, she died. Pretty like she had a pretty, steep and quick decline. So I think that this was kind of a lifelong relationship where she was both protecting them financially, but also, in terms of physical support. And they in return were, what they really couldn't give her a whole lot. They could pray for her.
Of course. I mean,
And
she was a rich one, right?
they had a scriptorium there. They could write a manuscript for her.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like the monks themselves at San Benedetto couldn't do a whole lot for her.
Yeah, of course. The abbey, what you said, is San Benedetto, which one? In Polirone?
Yeah.
The one, right? I just want to put up the map so we know where it is.
Absolutely beautiful.
Is it good?
One of my favorite places, yeah.
Let me put it up on the stream. Hello, everybody, welcome.
Yeah, so that was actually, she was buried there until the 1630s when the Pope had her reburied. Yeah.
It always strikes me how far, because Canossa is not very close. Like we always didn't have Matilda with Canossa, but really this is really far away from her. And we talked about it last time, but it always strikes me how far away, how center Italy this is. No, sorry, northern Italy this is, ultimately.
I mapped out all of, well, obviously with some modern changes, I mapped out all of her charters, and she really is all over the place. But she does come back to Mantua and like the surrounding area a lot. I mean, it's considered one of her power bases. Her father had a palace there. Her father is probably buried in Mantua. So it makes sense that she's kind of stays around the area and is very familiar with it. It makes sense to me. That's why she was probably buried there, but not within the city proper, because the city rebelled for like 15 years. Yeah.
They were in sadful terms.
There's a whole passage in the Vita Matildas that's basically like, these damn Mantuans, they don't even know what's good for them.
I wait to get to in the stream later on.
It's a really direct criticism of the city because they basically they decided to take privileges from the emperor rather than Matilda.
Okay. Oh yeah, which is not.
I'm getting a phone call.
Oh.
I have no idea from whom, so I'm assuming it's spam.
Probably advertisements. Yeah. They want to say something.
Yeah, and basically the Mantuans, once they decided to take the privileges from Henry, basically decided that they didn't give a single crap about Matilda, and they kind of forcefully expelled her and her supporters. And she wasn't really in the city at all until like 1113, 1114. And then news of her death spread prematurely. And the Mantuans again rebelled. And there's a section in her charters that's just like, are you really, guys? I'm not dead yet. Like, this is
I'm not even dead yet.
Like, I haven't died. And like the Vita kind of touches on this again. But anyway, that's kind of why I fix a lot of this stuff to the late 1090s, because that would have been as close as she could have gotten to Mantua. And if anything before that, I'm not sure she would have patronized Mantua or San Benedetto, exactly. So, anyway.
Okay, that's a good introduction to this manuscript. That's fantastic. And
yeah, so the Liber Vitae at the beginning is really what I think is the most kind of convincing. It does a direct dedication to Matilda,
which we're talking about. Do we have this? Do we have it here? The beginning.
So the Morgan doesn't have the manuscript itself completely online. I've not really gotten a good answer as to why.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Because they have like 15 or 20 volumes of it.
They've got a lot of the decoration photograph, which is great. But the Liber Vitae is it's literally like a little booklet, basically, that's stuck at the front, and it's just got a list of names. And it's kind of difficult to get through because, like, the scribal hand changes at some point, and then you've got like a new generation of scribes adding their names. So dating, like working out the dates, was kind of complicated. But you can kind of generally get that this is coming at the earliest 1099, maybe all the way up till 1009, or sorry, 1109, where there's like a continuation, and she still would have been alive. So it's possible, but I tend to affix it around 1099 because I think once you kind of consider the exegetical reception of the images inside the gospel, it makes sense that it kind of coincides with the First Crusade.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, which is going to be part of what we're going to talk about as we come on. How long would it take to make such a manuscript? Just as a, if you know, maybe you don't know.
I actually don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
I would assume it probably took shorter than an average gospel, just because you don't have the same level of coloring. It seems, it does. I do agree with the fact that it was probably interrupted. It's just we don't know.
Okay. So you don't know. You don't agree with the fact that it was interrupted because of the wars. You agree it was interrupted because of coloration.
I do agree that they're unfinished because this style, the kind of line drawings or the minimalistically decorated drawings, that wasn't necessarily a feature of manuscripts in this area in this period. And it does kind of, if you look at it as, a work in progress, right? Rather than fully finishing one page at a time, you might lay down the red on all of your pages. And then once that's dry, come back and lay down the gold for all of your pages.
That's how I work myself in my own PhD. So
right. That's how a lot of people, that makes the most sense rather than switching between colors one at a time. You might work in a process, and you can kind of see that at the beginning, at the beginning of these really important sections, that you have these really sumptuously decorated pages. We have this portrait of Matthew, I think it is, that is just, it's fully colored. It looks like a really kind of typical manuscript page in a lot of ways. And then you kind of get to the end, like the page you're looking at now, and it's just line drawings with red ink and gold. And it's like, they never got to the rest of it.
To the fancy stuff. And to answer it, that I do put gold in my thesis, actually. Yeah, that's part of the process.
Have you not? I put gold.
Right?
I lined every page with like $100 just
just to make sure that it passes, when you send it to the thesis review.
I want my reviewers to be like, oh, thank you.
Exactly. Well, I meant to say, of course, that I split up my work into, first one section and another section. But yeah, also then when it comes to the gold, I put the gold all at once. Great. Okay. So should we start looking at the illuminations? I don't know. We have 7 viewers right now. I think that's I don't know. We're gonna have many more than that.
Great.
And let's see people that you're waiting for that are supposed to come.
Let's start on this one then, because this is a really good image. Let's see. So we're looking.
It's pretty long image. So just a sec, please go on. I'm looking at the one that starts with the Washington feet, Last Supper, Jesus at the Gethsemane, and then
Yeah, so I love these types of gospels because they're like, let's cram as much real estate as we possibly can. So they're like different parts of the story kind of stacked, these unofficial registers. And without the color, I think it's really hard to look at because there's just a lot, and there's not any kind of color to distinguish what's important, what's not important, except for obviously the halos, which have all been, they've all been done in gold. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's great. That's nice and easy to distinguish. But beyond that, you kind of have to zoom in because we're looking at the lower portion of this image.
Let's see as much you can go. How is that? Is that fine?
Just laughing at
it is my plan for work. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, that's clearly why I don't have a poster right now. Is I did not put
enough gold. You put some gold, but not quite enough.
God damn it!
Oh Lord, yeah.
Okay, so the bottom, what we're looking at is kind of the bottom half, and I kind of informally divide these into registers, just it's a little easier to refer to. Yeah. So this is registers 3 and 4.
Yeah. So talking about the Gethsemane and Peter, yeah.
Yes. So we've got in Register 3, we have got the Kiss of Judas, which is that kind of famed scene right before Christ kind of gets taken away and arrested. And in this scene itself, you're literally seeing Judas has arrived with the Roman guards who are going to take Christ away. And they've got this like really kind of intimate scene in the middle of the page, basically. Where you've got Judas on the right holding a scroll, which just has a little bit of, it's like an identifying passage, basically. It's a little reference point to be like, oh, right, that's the traitor.
Have you seen this in person?
Yes.
Okay. So because here isn't readable right now, right? That's...
Yeah. Yeah. I have a transcription. I'm not gonna
Yeah, no
I'm not
worries.
gonna try to read Latin. I don't. I try to avoid it as much as possible.
Sorry, I did something. My bad. Let's ignore that. I don't know what happened there.
Well, you can zoom in. If you click on the image, you can actually zoom in a bit more.
It's not behaving very well, so I'm gonna... Oh, that's better. It's still pretty unreadable, but... Oh, that's better, actually. That's a lot better. Wow, nice.
So you've got Judas on the right holding his little scroll, and then you've got Christ on the left who's holding two scrolls that kind of is referencing the scripture where it's like, you've betrayed me or whatever. You've got
that's exactly what he said.
I'm reading that exactly verbatim from the Bible with a little fist shake. And this kind of is just the setup for what happens below, right? This idea that you've got the betrayal of Christ happening, this very kind of, I'll kind of get into it, but a very contemporary image of the church kind of having its foundations etched away from external forces. So now I sent you that other image of the one from the Henry III Gospels, which would have been about 1050, if I remember correctly. Same scene. Just the top is really this kind of combination. They set up the gospel stories a bit differently. But you'll see here that the story, this is actually how it's tended to be framed in the 11th century. So you have the story kind of goes, Judas comes, gives Christ the kiss. The guards then know who to go and arrest. And the rest of the apostles, except for Peter, they flee out of fear. And Peter comes and grabs Malchus, and this is in the 4th register of the Matilda Gospels, and starts to cut his ear off. That's what we see at the very bottom of the Matilda Gospels. But here in the Henry Gospels, which is, I think, from a lot of the examples I looked at, this is this kind of standard depiction of this time. You have Christ actually trying to interrupt the violence. So you see this kind of arm outstretched from this kind of chaos of bodies, where he is, extending the two fingers to Peter, who's kind of got this big old knife in his hand, and he's like, I've cut this guy's ear off. I might do something more.
Yeah.
And the whole symbolism of this is Christ intervened in what was he stopped the violence from being any worse than it already was. And as part of the kind of the biblical story, Christ steps in and he shows compassion and he heals Malchus's ear. And apologizes to him, and then kind of chastises Peter for kind of being reckless and violent. That's how this usually says. So you in the Henry Gospels, you are actually seeing this kind of transmutation from violence to forgiveness, and from violence to healing, where you have Christ literally standing as a symbol of, we're not about this righteous vengeance. We are, we in the New Testament anyway, we are about moving forward and healing and forgiving. And so that's, I think, a really good counterpoint to the Matilda Gospels, where literally all you get is you get the setup of Christ being betrayed, and then you get Peter cutting an ear off. And that's it. You do not get any healing moment. You don't get an intervention from Christ. You do not get, really, you don't get any of the kind of action and active scene of maybe it's, if you want to say visual predecessor of the 1050s. And I kind of interpret this in a couple different ways. So one, because the next page moves on to kind of the next part of the passion cycle. Does not address it, does not in any way suggest that Christ has intervened, does not even reference the fact that Christ has healed the violence. It kind of frames the violence itself as the righteous action of Peter, that Christ was betrayed and Peter then acts in vengeance. And it's this kind of really singularized version of the story, where you get this, the rest of the image is so crowded and so busy visually, but the lowest kind of register, the little section of this story is just two figures. It's really simple, and it really just seems as the culmination of the events as they're happening, rather than kind of an edited segment as it really is. And you would really need to know the actual story to get any of this, right? Because if you don't know the rest of the story, right, that Christ heals the ear and apologizes, you are only seeing it as
Peter cutting
like,
your
you're having a nice dinner, and then this asshole, he ruined things, and he got our friend arrested, and we're mad about it. And then one of his other friends cut his ear off. Like, it seems as a logical progression and a logical end to the violation of Christ. And I mean, in this, in 1099 makes a lot of sense. Because 1099 is the kind of the launching of the First Crusade. You've had in 1095, you have Urban, pronouncing that there is a duty to Christians and to serve other Christians that might be in peril and to liberate them from the oppressors. In some cases, it's the Orthodox Church that had split off earlier in the century. In a lot of other cases, it's the Muslims that have variously kind of encroached on the Levant. And you have this idea kind of being thrown in motion that the church itself needs to defend itself. And that it has the power to not only motivate people within its ranks, but to really kind of, it owes itself the obligation to defend itself.
It is, Laser asks. If it's
yes, it is. I don't know.
That's a good point,
I don't
actually.
know why. I don't know why they're depicted as Romans. Yeah,
because it was Temple Guard. It wasn't Roman Guard. That's a good point.
They are framed as Romans, which I do find quite curious, really kind of considering at the kind of the end of the 11th century going into the 12th century that you have this idea of this revival of Roman print aesthetics and stuff. And it's like, if you want to, Matilda herself actually participated in a lot of this like New Romanitas. Why would you depict them as Romans? Doesn't that mean you're the bad guy?
What about, because something else you mentioned, of course, the Orthodox Church, the split off, and the Muslims, but of course there's a period also of the conflict with the emperor, right? And he was the Roman emperor, was he not?
So, yeah, you would have had in 1099, Henry would have been the Holy Roman Emperor, but that would have only been by the declaration of the anti-pope, not the actual pope. So it depends. Fair. We take that as modern historians, we shorthand just call him the Holy Roman Emperor, considering his child went on to actually have the title legitimized. But from in late 11th century perspective, would that have been legitimate?
That's a good point.
From a Matilda perspective, probably not.
No, yeah.
So, I don't know.
Well, I guess the only thought was like the defense of the church also against the secular world, right? Against Henry ultimately. What Sandra says.
So that is a really good point. That the Romans were kind of considered these misguided pagans in a lot of ways. So that's certainly, I don't think I wrote about them being portrayed as Romans all that much. I think I was just identifying them, but that's a good point.
I think you have an article to write now. I think that's what's happening.
Can I write that
down?
I will just cite a Twitch comment.
We're getting there. We're getting to the place.
Can you imagine? I mean, I did cite someone on Reddit helped me with the Latin translation, and I did cite their Reddit name as so I was like, thank you for your help.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's really
Like,
good. I mean, you can start the YouTube video that's gonna come up. Yeah,
I
also better
saw
than in a dream. I love that the image. You know the image, right? It's like, dude, I saw it in a dream, and it's like, that's great. That's great.
I mean, that feels pretty legit. I've definitely had a lot of dreams that have told me to do things,
Yeah,
and then I do them. So
really? Oh, that's awesome. Right, okay. You're very biblical then, not just in your studies, but also in your actions.
I'm not saying they're like good things. Like it's like, oh, I should try that.
I should try. That's a good show, actually. Those are good numbers to play at the lotto. And,
Yeah, I'm not that lucky. If
it's a
I were
very
to,
striking image. I find it super striking how alone this thing is. It almost seems incomplete. Like literally they want it, but it's not, I assume. But
yeah.
busy, busy,
So
busy, only that image.
that's why I think it's so important to kind of dissect it, and like what it's leaving out is equally important as to what it's actually included.
Because there was
Um,
space to put more, right? If they wanted.
right, exactly. They had if
Mhm.
they wanted to put in the context, or they
They could
wanted to
have.
add, shift it over and add some other things. They absolutely could have. And there's nothing to suggest that any of these line drawings are unfinished. So with that in mind, it kind of becomes, well, why didn't they? Why didn't they have this little, like the actual conclusion of the story as told by the scriptures? Why not include that if you really want it to be a true representation? Where in fact, I do think it's actually the kind of interpretation of these gospel stories to kind of tell a point. And actually, this would be a good time to switch over to the cleansing of the temple image.
Sure.
Is the cleansing of the temple
Let's
image
do
is
it.
if this is
That is.
obvious, the other one is like hitting you over the head with it.
Okay, okay, okay. Okay, there it is.
So it's 84R.
This
And
is
I absolutely just love this image. It's fantastic.
very unclear, very unfocused, but
So
because if you click on it, does yours focus well? Because mine becomes just blurry, blurrier.
mine focuses. Yeah,
Why,
mine
why,
does
why is mine not
focus.
behaving like it should? I mean,
Yeah, these drawings are so. I do wish they were colored. I think they would look even more remarkable if they'd actually gotten a chance to be painted. But even so,
it's the
they're
website
really
not working.
expressive,
So,
and they show action in process really amazingly,
mhm.
particularly in this image.
Let me share the link again of the other thing if you want to look at them
Oh yeah,
in
these are
person.
online. If
Yeah,
y'all want to
I
like.
put the link on the
Follow.
Twitch. Yeah. Right.
So
So walk me through it.
this is the famed cleansing of the temple,
Mhm.
and the kind of the expelling of the money changers. And we are like literally looking at exactly that. It's not the lead up, it's not the aftermath.
Just
We are
there.
actually seeing Christ himself with a braided rather whip kind of going in and physically expelling these people who have sinned against the kind of the church and Christ himself. And I think that this image is just, it's so remarkable because it's not just that these people are being physically punished, which is a very Old Testament take anyway, but it's like Christ himself is wielding this like braided whip at these people. And you've kind of got this really beautiful wave of action kind of emanating from Christ. So like again, it's kind of broken down into registers,
Mhm.
where you've got like this little building in the top left corner, which is there. Some people have kind of interpreted it as this is the temple, and this is then what we see enclosed is the courtyard. I kind of interpret it as the building itself is a representation of Jerusalem, because you see in other manuscripts this kind of shorthand of Jerusalem as like the walls and the gates that surround the city. It's unclear. It really is just kind of generic architecture that Christ is kind of stepping out of. But it's just this beautiful image where you can see exactly where it starts. Like Christ has just kind of swept into the temple. And I love this little detail, like in his feet. You see that they're not just firmly planted, they're like really trying to get at what it looks like to be striding forward. It's really kind of this great classicizing element of it looks real. It looks like real feet as they're really moving. And it just has
this
this
is
great
11th
effect.
century, right? So that's really early as well.
1099. Yeah, this is like really
Super
at the
early.
cusp before things kind of kicked off in the mid 12th century.
Yeah.
So you have Christ kind of moving forward. He's got this script which has a reference to the scriptures that say like, I need to expel you money changers. And literally
again, verbatim from the scriptures.
Yes, verbatim, I'm literally reading to you exactly as the Bible. My fun summaries of what the Bible says are A+.
You turn the house of God and then of Thieves.
Yeah, you just sum it up.
Sum it up. Yeah.
So on this first level, you've got this kind of the immediate aftershocks of Christ coming in. So you've got people literally falling over backwards. You've got tables, kind of with coins all about them. This guy, right here, right at the bottom of the scroll, he's like literally like tumbling over backwards. The coins have like spewed forth from his table as it knocks over. It's a fun image to look at because it really, you're like, go Jesus, go, like get him. You've kind of got these birds that are like starting to take flight. They have been startled. Yeah, it's just this really beautiful image of violence, though. Like, it's not just Christ walking in and being like, get out. He's got this hand.
Almost a wave of power that everybody is being shooed away from, right?
Yeah, and he is just kind of emanating this authority about him that this is like his domain and he has the right to enforce the will of his domain, even if it means taking a whip to his fellow man, which feels very unlike Christ, right? In the larger scheme of the New Testament, it feels very much like this this justice, this kind of old school violent justice of the Old Testament. But you know, I think if you kind of, again, with the context of this formation of, you know, just bellum justice, which this idea that it's okay for Christians to be violent as long as it's for a good cause, as long as it's for the defense and the kind of protection of the church. It's not only is it okay, it's an obligation. That you have this idea kind of being propped up in the mid 11th century. It's only really solidified by Gregory VII, really kind of forcefully in the Dictatus, which really literally says like the church can do whatever it wants and it's above everyone else, and that means it is the sole superior force on earth, because it's the only one that has an immortal connection to the spiritual realm. And this really does get crystallized in the 1080s. You have a couple of different theologians really connecting the cleansing of the temple scene to this idea that Christianity needs to be cleansed. And it kind of moves from this vague idea of others to, at first, really kind of reacting to the schism in 1055. You have this idea that they need to be these heretics practicing their Orthodox Christianity. They need to be brought back into the fold. And this then again kind of undergoes another mutation in the 1080s and 1090s to really focus on it's everyone outside of Catholicism that needs to be brought back forcefully into the grace of God. And this cleansing of the temple scene gets remarked upon in a lot of different, I would say, scholars and theologians' remarks on the kind of contemporary setting of the church. Yeah.
And of course, there's echo in Urban II's writings when, because there's the idea of righteous anger, right? That's often when we talk about passions. Anger is not necessarily a sinful passion, but because it could be righteous anger, it generally is. Generally, is not the best approach, but it could be righteous. And of course, when Urban describes the evil of the Muslims in the Levant, it kind of brings up the idea of righteous anger, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this idea that the Christians have this obligation to defend the church is really kind of drawing on these earlier principles developed in really during Matilda's lifetime, 1070s, 1080s, that this idea that the church is its own kind of sovereign entity, that it's above all the other kingdoms of the earth, and kind of hand in hand needs to defend itself, needs to be able to call on people to defend itself. Yeah, and so you have this kind of really beautiful development of this idea that it is in the Bible, the story of the money changers. It is there, and they're just now using it to justify this new take on whether or not they're allowed to kind of defend themselves. The cleansing of the temple is used, post First Crusade, as early as 1105 in kind of crusading texts to kind of justify that they are acting as Christ and they are cleansing the temple. They're cleansing, and the temple can be really whatever.
Of course.
The temple is whatever they want it to be at the time of writing. So it can be the Levant, it can be the church itself, it could be really specifically, you even see it sometimes applied in terms of dioceses. So really like small localized areas.
Of course, yeah.
Because it becomes such a powerful metaphor for these Christians to say, well, Christ did it. Christ defended himself and his church because he was compelled to. And that was fine. And everyone says it's fine. So I'm Christ. This is my temple. Get out.
Well, yeah, it makes even more sense when thinking about I know I literally wrote an article on this on the moment, crusades against other Christians, right? Because how in the case of the temple it's other Jews ultimately profaning the temple, not the Muslims, but not an external religion, right? In the same way Christ is angry at them, as in the gospel is often angry at the Pharisees, right? In the same way, although this is much more violent, of course.
So there is in the 1070s Gregory was, while he was developing this idea of papal supremacy, he does use these texts really specifically while talking about taking a kind of, I call it a proto-crusade. Some people have drawn issue with that. Whatever. A proto-crusade down to Constantinople in order to help, take that as what you will, to help the Christians left behind by the Orthodoxy after the schism. And that then eventually that idea becomes, they'll go to Constantinople and then they'll kind of swing around to Jerusalem. And they never go anywhere. Gregory never got any support. This is 1074, so it's right before they actually kick off in terms of the king and the Pope actually really getting on each other's throats in 1077. Matilda was actually called specifically to help Gregory with this, was named as a trusted supporter and someone who had already agreed, both herself and troops, to kind of go down in the effort. Unfortunately, it never happened. But the point of it was to really kind of bring Christians back in line. And this idea that it was a kind of a pilgrimage, but it was kind of also like a military campaign. And that is like a really key kind of moment in the developments that really lead up very quickly to 1095 when Urban's like, all right, we're doing it, let's do this.
Again, in very much in idea helping of Constantinople, right? Which in the First Crusade does happen, right? That's probably the time when the two cooperate quite strongly, the Eastern Emperor and the Crusaders. What's a cat?
Never again. And never again.
And then it becomes less easy for sure. The Emperor's like, this is a bad idea, we should not have done this. It didn't work as well as we wanted.
Yeah, it's the politics of this gospel, I think, kind of coming back to the materiality of it itself, right? It was meant to sit on an altar. It was meant to be used frequently. And not only that, with Matilda's name being so prominently attached to it, that you have this idea that it's this passive propaganda just sitting out, that every time someone goes through this gospel, they are being confronted with these images that are yes, obviously they're referencing scripture, but they're doing so in such a specific way to really emphasize very specific points about what was happening in the 11th century. And so, it's not like you're flipping through and you're like, and yes, here is a moment in the Passion cycle where Malchus gets his ear cut off, and then Jesus does his like magic and like heals it up.
It's a miracle, yeah.
It's not that. And then Peter kicked the crap out of Malchus. He cut his ear off, and Peter is the church, obviously. Like that. Yeah. That was a well-known thing. A stand-in. It's hard not to think that these people weren't, they would have already been on the side of the papacy. Like they would have already been exposed to these ideas that the church had a duty to protect itself and its followers. And so it's this kind of reinforcing idea of something. It's not tucked away in a bookshelf. It's out and available, and something that you're kind of expected to absorb if you didn't already. Kind of considering the cultural climate of that section of Italy during this time.
Yeah, I guess that's the question asked last time, right? And this would have been impactful, especially for, I assume, monks that came after this was done, which then, in the following years, I assume, would have used this gospel in their liturgy. Right? Because otherwise, it's not a Facebook post, right? It doesn't get as much traction as...
I mean, we don't know how long this book would have actually sat out. There's really no way of knowing that, except for by tracking the signatures of the names being put into the Liber Vitae, which go really like kind of sporadically. Like it's not they don't go like from 1099 to 1213. They kind of seem like, in my impression anyway, that perhaps the book is being replaced or taken out, because after Matilda dies, right, they have a kind of a due obligation to take donations from other patrons. And I don't know what their patronage record looked like after Matilda's death, but I'm sure that they were having, they were one of the largest in the area at the time. So it makes sense to me that they may have rotated it out, being like, well, she is dead. Like, she's not going to know. She has no heirs. What are they going to do? Tell on us? But they were, I do think they probably left it out for a while. There are signatures up until like the 15th century. So it's clear to me that they are still taking it out to some extent to be like.
Tell me more about this Liber Vitae. I didn't quite understand. That's so people use this sign there, or what?
So the Liber Vitae basically sat at the beginning of the manuscript itself, and you can literally just kind of imagine a little folio. It's maybe, God, it's not many pages. It's definitely less than 10.
Okay.
And essentially, it acknowledges that Matilda, this is the benefit. They read these names out for the benefit of Matilda and her military advisor, Arduino. And that you basically just, the point is that you read names before every mass. And it's a way to kind of put their name out there, attach it to the sermon, but also to like pray for them. And you literally you have your name written in there. It's not unlike what we might do in like a prayer book now, where you kind of sign it before mass and then the priest might read it out loud.
Sure.
It's very similar. And so there are signatures that kind of go sporadically until like the 15th century. So it does suggest that they are still sometimes taking it out. Yeah. People are like, oh, Matilda, because she becomes a big draw for her being buried there. Becomes like a
even
big
for
deal.
Manta, even if they weren't the most faithful subjects of Matilda.
I mean, look, they did sell her body, so
I guess that's fair enough. That's a good point. Secretly, don't complain about it, right? So there is that.
The whole story behind Matilda's reburial is so funny to me. It's just I do come back to Donizo in the Vita Matilda just being like, you damn Mantuans, you don't even know what you want.
And this shows until the 15th century, right? Is it 15th, 16th century when they rebury her?
So she was reburied in St. Peter's in 1633.
Okay, so 17th century. Oh, well, that's a long time after. That's a long time after. Wow, okay.
And then, there's nothing to suggest that they could have still been using the book. that like
Sure.
they were moving her tomb around up until it was like removed to to St. Peter's. And a lot of the kind of 15th, 16th, 17th century stuff around it suggests that it was being moved to accommodate the pilgrims who were coming to see her. So like she clearly had some draw, and they probably did. It may have moved off of the altar for practical use and away for like visitor use. That's unclear. There's not really a whole lot in terms of Matilda research kind of centered around the 13, 14, and 1500s. In that we know that she gets dropped, like name dropped a lot of being like a relative of other prestigious Italians. But in terms of what she's kind of being adapted for, it hasn't really been widely explored.
Also, because she never got canonized, right? So that
No,
which is
she
weird,
did
isn't
have
it?
miracles. She had miracles associated with her tomb, though. So it's clear that someone was like at some point
Trying hard.
trying to. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the 1500s, I think 15 or 1400s. There is like documents of like people being spontaneously healed at her tomb. So yeah, it's clear that like there was at least some party interested in getting her canonized, but it did never happen. And she did really remain like a very prominent local figure that people knew of and really had a lot of reverence for, but maybe not in the same way as like a saint.
No, sure, of course. I want to ask a couple of questions about the Cleansing Temple again. Of course, the scene is in the gospel itself is quite particular. And why do you say? Because you're saying how it beats you over the head with the idea of the church and its right, its duty almost of this cleansing of the temple, whatever that could mean. But what is it? What in the scene is so? Because like this seems so a normal representation to me that I've never seen any other representation of the cleansing temple. Jesus with a whip and the moneylenders running away, right? Is it just because it's so large? Or what's so particular about the scene depicted here? Or different from other previous?
No, that's a great... So the way, obviously, like across the four Gospels, right, you have versions of this story being told. And only in, I believe it's John, do you have him actually wielding a weapon. So this is a very selective retelling, right? It doesn't align with the other three Gospels who are like, it happened, but wasn't Christ doing the action. It wasn't Christ doing the actual expulsion. Or that rather that it wasn't framed violently by the hands of Christ himself. But in fact, we have, and this is just also to say that it's not like the gospel is singularly using the Gospel of John's depiction of things.
Sure.
They pick and choose.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the selection of the very violent image, right, where it's Christ actually using a whip, which only appears in 25% of it.
Sure.
I think that's really telling, and the fact that it gets this whole page, whereas with the other kind of scenes of the Passion cycle, it's segmented.
Fair enough.
Every
that's a really good point.
has like 4 different processes of the story, whereas this you get a whole page devoted to what is essentially a second, right? We are seeing like a freeze frame image.
A couple of lines
violence kind of emanating, but we're not seeing, we're seeing people flee, but we're not seeing like what happens in the immediate aftermath. We're literally just seeing, it's just as if time is stopped on this one image to show the exacting force and power of Christ as he needs to defend, his home.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, especially considering how, looking back at, you made the point here, the passion is the most important aspect of the gospel, not in a sense of like liturgically and spiritually for Christians, and it's like, well, there's you can divide it in 4 parts, it's not.
They're like, we have to cram so much in about this story.
But like, oh, actually, this part,
but then also then they're like, well, a whole page to this. It's like, well, what are you getting at, right? And a lot of like art history is looking at like what story are they trying to tell us by what they're putting in and what they're not putting in visually. And to me, right? The choice to make to devote an entire page to this scene suggests that it held at least some significance, both in terms of its meaning for the people who were reading the gospel, but also probably for the patron, Matilda herself.
Yeah, well, certainly, probably more for her, right? As well, I suspect. Also, it says here, if I'm reading correctly, Initium Sancti Evangelii Secundum Johannem. So is it just the beginning page of the Gospel of John in the...
So it is, yeah, it's at the outset of it.
Okay,
so really,
that's even more significant, right? That's really increasing the...
It really kind of frames the action and the kind of the gist of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely, a lot. Given of course right now the Gospel of John is very much seen for its Eucharistic focus in we often let's refer to that, and having the cleansing temple as
come back to a lot, and it's like prefaced by this giant depiction of like literally Christ kicking ass is the way I always kind of think about it. Like, this is action superstar Jesus Christ, you know.
Yeah, very, very much a musical, you know. It's the preface of the 20th century musical.
Yeah, he's picking and punching his way to, like, I don't know, Christian freedom or something.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's such a specific take of all of the stories in the Bible to emphasize, right? Or all of the allegories of Christ kind of protecting the church or protecting Christendom. This is the one they picked, and this is the one that they devote so much, like, energy.
Yeah. And of course, I also noticed just how many people are in the picture besides Christ, right? Almost all the enemies of the church are present in this one.
Within this kind of like nice kind of architectural frame, they have crammed in like 20 people. I actually don't remember the exact.
And they'll do the same thing, right? They're all money changers, more or less, which is interesting. They're not like
animal sellers.
Animal sellers and money changers. It's very interesting.
It's such a great image. It's just it's one of the more emotive ones where you kind of get this idea. It feels more like a comic to me rather than an illumination, because you have this really, really clear idea of like who's the hero and who is the villain and what's the action and where is it going. It all feels very laid out and almost in a modern way, right? The story is so clear in a way that when you look at something like, you know, the Passion Cycle, where you've got these kind of stories all happening simultaneously on the page, but they're all depicting various kind of moments in the story. That it can become really difficult to understand unless you have, you know, the background of the right. But you don't really need that for the cleansing of the temple scene. It's really clear cut, even if you don't know who Jesus is or what the temple is or what's happening.
This guy's
get the main point.
Yeah, the very clear.
I do kind of think if this, you know, a lot of these typical gospels that would have been fully illuminated, partially because they were meant to be shown to others, particularly the non-literate lay people who might come to see it or might come to seek spiritual counsel. And it was a really good visual way to be like, Jesus good, non-Jesus bad. And if this, I don't think that this would have been one that you could have actually held up to mass people. It doesn't read well from afar. You really do need to kind of be sitting right over
there. You need to control zoom. Is the problem.
Even in like a well-lit examination room, it's still one where I was like, I can't see anything.
Really? Okay. Wow. Okay. Interesting. How big is that, by the way?
It is about this notebook, which I think is like an A4 size.
Yeah.
So it's not huge, but it's, you know, maybe a little bit smaller than some illuminated gospels I've seen.
Yeah, it wasn't done to be held up and shown, right? It wasn't like the huge music things that you shift the pages.
Well, right. You've got these, like, the giant books, the giant Bibles, or I think that's what they're called, coming out of Italy, which are literally like 2 feet. You know, those are not meant to be like held up and displayed.
They were just there.
Big.
And then,
But these are like, these are the kind of size books where it's like you could hold up if you wanted to, and they're like in that nice sweet spot of being big enough where you can kind of read detail and you can see the sumptuous materials, but small enough that you can like hand it off to someone and you're not gonna like crush them.
Mm-hmm. Because I know that size-wise, especially for scholars to sing together, right? They would have this very large and music notation, and they just
with a big old
one guy
music
just turn the page very slowly. Yeah, whatever the same
with the
from.
stick.
Yeah.
But like, I do think this feels very didactic in a lot of ways. Like, if it had been fully colored, you would have had this really great and very straightforward image of like the purpose of Christianity, the purpose of the church in Christianity. That would have been, again, had it been fully colored, a really great way to show people who maybe couldn't actually read the Bible, but like understood it and understood the point and were already on board. But then you show them this picture, it's like, look at Jesus. He's kicking the butt of all of the pagan unbelievers who are ruining everything.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
or
what
the unorthodox and heretics, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
Really good.
yeah. And actually, you can see, let me see if I can pull up the page number. But there is a really, if you want to see like what the fully colored pages look like, they do have some of the incipits at the very beginning, like Folio 13R.
I think
Those
this
are
one,
like
right? For
fully
example.
colored. The canon tables
Yeah.
are really beautifully colored. And then on 14, you have the seated portrait of Matthew.
Ooh, wow. Okay. Nice. By the way,
And that,
1 second. In just saying that everybody can think of, the people watching, if you want to ask questions, start putting them in the chat, and then we're gonna hit them.
yeah, if you don't have any questions or comments, like and subscribe.
No, just questions. I think we have 5, 6, or 7 people watching, so the usuals and maybe someone else. Anyway, you're saying Matthew, the picture of Matthew.
If you can zoom into this picture, it's so beautiful, and I think had the rest of it been done, it would have likely looked like this.
Yeah.
This
is higher quality than a movie Matilda, isn't it?
Well, the scriptorium at Polarone was really well known for its quality. It was put into the hands of Cluny, so like it had a lot of funding. It was really well trafficked in like these kind of big Catholic supporters during the time. And so it is one of these kind of grand mysteries of like, why didn't they finish it?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Yeah, given that it was used afterwards as well, until the 15th century.
Right, you'd think at some point.
Right.
So there is a school of thought that suggests, I believe it's this guy we were talking about earlier, Robert Ruff, who suggests that perhaps these are meant to be uncolored. That maybe they are in fact supposed to be these kind of bistre drawings with like bare accents in order to further accent these like seated portraits of the apostles. I don't know.
Okay.
I think if that were true, right, you probably wouldn't have the fully colored canon tables, because the canon tables themselves are they're utilitarian. They don't need to be colored. But in fact, they are kind of really beautifully decorated all the way around. The canon tables are completely done.
Which page is the canon tables?
So the canon tables are 15 RV, 16 RV. There's like 3 or 4 full
folios. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh wow, yeah. I saw them before. Sure, this is very nice.
Yeah, and but then you've got a couple of pages where it's text and then uncolored or uncolored illuminations, and then you have incipit pages which are partially colored, which makes me think that they were working in some sort of process of just not finishing.
Is 16R the same as the rest? It looks different.
What do you mean?
Look at this. Is it just a picture? Different? Look at 16R. Isn't it lighter colors?
I think it's photo. I think it's their photo quality.
Okay.
Yes, these photos. I tried to get them to when I was working on this in like 2018. God, that was 3 years ago. I had a nice correspondence where they're like, "You can use your pictures that you took," and I was like, "Do you have any plans on professionally like photographing these gospels again?" I think are taken from the early 2000s.
Badly
And
taken.
obviously, yeah, and reflect the quality.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, but if you want to have them photographed professionally, it'll be $1,000. And I was like, no, I don't.
$1,000? What the heck?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Like,
Wow. Okay.
who do you think I am? What kind of money do you think I have? I was like, I guess I just use my like cell phone pictures. Thanks.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Then you
Which
didn't
they
tell
made
the
the
bitches.
embargo anyway, so it doesn't even matter.
Exactly. Right?
But this, so I love this seated kind of picture of Matthew. It's just so beautiful, and it really shows, I think, the quality that was intended, but for some reason, never actually got to be finished. But
What did you do on something before we close? You mentioned that there are multiple schools of thought on why they was not finished, but you also said that people didn't really write on the Gospels themselves. How did that happen, given that people were clearly looking at them?
well, okay, so they are because they were bought by Pierpont himself, who is the founder of the Pierpont Morgan Library in whatever 19 whatever early 1900s. He was one of the big collectors of medieval manuscripts in the United States. And when he made this donation and created this library / museum, they had there was an initial interest in the Gospels as an object of the medieval period of the 11th century. But I think because they are also considered to be unfinished, or at the very least of lesser quality because they don't have this as much coloring, they don't get as much attention in the Morgan's collection as, say, some of the more beautiful and kind of like the Tres Belles Heures. Like they have them. They're beautiful and colored and really well known. So it kind of makes sense to me that these have been
almost
slotted as
overlooked, right?
they so a lot of, and this is the general problem about Matilda's patronage, is that it does tend to get subsumed into this larger idea of she was there and these things happened, but we haven't really directly attributed to it. And a lot of that problem, I think, is because a lot of her actions have been subsumed into the church as, i.e., which is a really big problem with female patrons of the Middle Ages, is that it's, well, she was religious. That's why these things happened. End of story. Whereas male patrons tend to have a kind of deeper examination as to why they did the things they did, what they're trying to say about themselves. Yeah, a lot
Which
of
is a disservice to both, isn't it? It's a disservice to both of course, Matilda in first place, right? And then there's the question, because it's you're forgetting her political and social power and impact and desires and schemes and goals. But also, of course, she was religious, and that definitely was part of her reasons. And the same was true for the others, right?
Right. And that's exactly it. It's this paradox, which is identified kind of in the early 90s, that female patrons in the Middle Ages are generally they're just kind of ascribed to it's. I know I got this when I was an undergrad, Book of Hours, they were feminine, they were small, they were portable, and it was because the woman was religious. Anyway, moving on. Instead of actually unpicking where when you look at male patrons, a lot of the times people will inherently ask, what are they trying to say about themselves? What are they trying to do for themselves? What's the purpose of this? And it just has had a flattening effect generally on kind of the scholarship of medieval patrons that are women. This is a trend that has really reversed since the 90s and is really kind of going the opposite direction of where now we're really trying to unpack why these female patrons did the things that they did and acted the way that they acted with their material objects. Matilda just seems Matilda just, I think she's in some ways very well known and in some ways completely obscure. And in that there is a lot of I think I'm one of the only, I'm pretty sure it's me and 3 other women who are actually women talking about this medieval woman. And a lot of them tend to be men who went through their kind of studies in the 70s and 60s. They're older and they have maybe some outdated ideas. Their scholarship is wonderful, but it does tend to overlook some of these ideas of like, why was Matilda doing the things she was doing other than just to support the church? Like, she can support the church while also doing things for herself. And I think that's where like the direction of it is going, is really trying to pick out, like, what did she do for the church? Why was some of it because she was religious? Yes, obviously she was very religious. But what was the rest of it for? Was the rest of it to prop up her own ideals? Was she trying to, I kind of think that some of her allegiance and devotion to the church bordered on kind of maniacal. It was nonsensical in some time. Like, she literally went broke supporting the church. She donated all of her money, all of her funds. She raided some monasteries for their treasuries to donate to the church.
Okay,
like, and that, to me, piety does not explain that alone. I think there is some idea of she legitimated her authority through the church, because the church needed her support, and they could support her claim to rulership, whereas the king stripped her of her lands and possessions, and really, called her, oh my God, I can't remember like a traitor, and he called him a tyrant. So there's clearly no love lost. Anyway, that's enough. That's a whole other thing.
Elizabeth asks, it makes a good point. It wasn't religious at the time. Most people were religious, that's true. Although it was a key part of the identity, right? So
which is exactly why it's such a ridiculous assumption that, like, everyone was religious to some degree. Like, and to stop there is to just basically say, like, we don't know when we're gonna give up.
No, I think it's a very dangerous, because I read it so many times the opposite as well. In discussing anybody, really, where you forget, well, actually maybe part of it was because they were religious, right? And that kind of sometimes gets forgotten, which is like, wait a second, wouldn't that be kind of important probably in this church business thing? Maybe, I don't know. But editor asks, how easy was it to get these colors at a time? I assume the colors for the illuminations.
So
you probably know more than us.
I also know very little, so I will tell you what I know.
Go ahead, that's all you can do.
So these colors, by the 11th century, particularly colors such as like blue, which was the hardest to get pigment, would have been widely available to larger, well-connected monasteries. So smaller scriptoriums would have definitely had a harder time getting some of these more like sumptuous colors. And blue is the one I kind of come to because it's the hardest to get, aside from purple, which tends to have to be extracted from, I think during this time it was seashells. So it was really incredibly difficult. I think what's actually more remarkable, aside from the colors, is the gold leaf that gets used throughout, and the fact that that it's used on. So actually, if you go back to the cleansing of the temple image, you'll see it's actually used on the horns of some of the animals, which is like. I mean, obviously, you've got like the Gospels. The Apostles' kind of beastly figures. Like you kind of got that tie-in, but it's still like, of all the things you're gonna put gold on, that seems like a little
good point. Actually, that's an interesting point. Yeah,
which to me says, and this is actually pretty well known about this area and about San Benedetto. San Benedetto as an institution is fairly well studied, but it does illustrate that they were very well connected and that they were probably sourcing this material from all over, not just Italy, but probably across the Alps, where a lot of the monasteries working in and around Aachen would have had good reliable access to these like kind of rarer pigments because of their patronage in relationship to the emperor, which is a funny kind of thing to think about, that they were potentially sourcing these materials from the sworn enemy.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah. I would love to see if there is a study about the way in which materials for these manuscripts would have flown, like how they progressed during this period. It's also possible, now that I think about it, that they could have possibly gotten these materials from the sources that were also feeding Monte Cassino, because you have the scriptorium down there, which was really, I think, probably the dominant one in all of the peninsula at this period. And Matilda was well connected to Desiderius, who then became Pope Victor II, very unwantingly to become Pope. But so it's possible that they would have had that kind of built-in network by also being a Cluniac monastery. Like they had that support outside of Italy. So if anything, I think the colors, more than just obviously the material wealth that Matilda would have been shelling out at this period to support something like this, it also shows that the monastery itself is able to get these kind of rarer materials like gold leaf, blues. Yeah.
Yeah, so the basic answer is how easy it was to get the colors? Really hard. Unless you are rich and well connected.
Yeah, hard unless you're connected.
Yeah,
I think that's probably the best shorthand way to describe it.
Yeah. Excellent. Look, I think that's probably us on the hour and 15 minutes. And thanks a lot. That was actually lovely. That was really interesting. Like last time. Let's see what happens in a couple of months' time. Maybe we guess a different topic altogether to talk about.
Next guest has to be someone else, though.
Yeah, that's true. That's accurate. Elizard needs to be guested upon here, but we'll see.
Yeah, let's get some guest spots that I can make fun comments to.
Yeah, that would be great. So, because I want to have Elizard and Hildebrand both on, and they're both shy.
Yeah.
So I need to drop them in more, or other people I don't know, and I could just rope in to do the. I mean, Daniel is my one to do it. But again, he's working hard. Sorry?
I said wherever he went.
Wherever he went. This is what he's doing anyway. That's for not the stream. Right, guys, thanks so much for watching. I'm gonna close the stream now. And again, if you have any questions, I'm gonna put this on YouTube. It's quickly. It takes a while to do the whole thing.
Me?
Sorry?
They can tweet me if they have any questions.
Exactly. Tweet you or put a comment in the video. They're both options.
Guys.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot for watching, and thank you. No, thank you for the questions as well. And goodbye.
See you tonight.
See you tomorrow, right? What do tomorrow? We find out tomorrow what we're doing tomorrow. Probably transcribing Bolognese documents. That's what I'm doing tomorrow. All right. Goodbye, everybody.